Now for our roundtable, joining me today, Mariana Mancuso, Republican political strategist, author of PoliticalHype.com, a blog aimed at conservative millennials. Thank you for being here as always. And Antonio Fens, political editor with the Palm Beach Post. I love when we get our familiar faces in. We're all buckling up for political season, going into highest gear here. Are we seeing a time, though, when people are more likely to question the integrity, the sanctity of the process? We just talked about that with Ms. Davis. Concerns nationwide, of course, been a lot of national coverage of late. What is your sense?
Well, you know, there was a hackers convention in Las Vegas last week, and an 11-year-old was actually able to hack into what was a replica of the Florida state election, and that causes a little concern for a lot of people. But we're reminded that in the voting precincts, they actually keep the paper ballots for 22 months. So that's something that everyone should be very okay with. And then the last thing is Seminole County is actually building a cyber moat around their defenses. So I think we're doing everything we possibly can across the entire state to ensure voter security across the board.
Antonio, are we in an age though where people are going to be much faster to say something happened because my candidate didn't win?
Yeah, but Michael, we've kind of been there in Florida. Remember hanging chads, the touchscreen voting, and that was the reason we got out of touchscreen voting and went to back to the paper ballots, was because people didn't trust. They thought that somebody could come in and manipulate the results and cheat somebody out of a victory. I think the difference now, 10 years later after that debacle, is that you've got so much more mistrust of government institutions than we did back then. So and people, we look at what's happening with like the FBI and a lot of government institutions. I think there is, we're in that age.
I think it's going to be interesting as we look at that as an ongoing subset of this overall debate. As we talk about that, though, Antonio, your colleague, and we can put the numbers up at the Palm Beach Post, George Bennett did a story looking at voter registration numbers, shows Democratic registration fallen almost 1%, while Republican registration in Florida up 1%, no party affiliation, a growing chunk of Floridians up 4.2%. What's it mean to both of you for this talk Democrats have had about a blue wave that they hope will wash ashore in Florida as well? First you, Antonio.
Well, clearly the numbers are quite surprising. Republicans, given the Trump fervor and given the fact that they are the party in power, you would have thought that they would have more than 1%. And Democrats, given all the talk about a blue wave and this comeback, you would have thought they would have more than 0.8% drop. The interesting thing is 5%, almost 5% growth in the non-politically affiliated, which means that when you get beyond the primary into the general election, if you're going to win statewide, you got to be moved more to the center, and that will have ramifications for whomever wins the Democratic and the Republican primaries for governor.
Are the Democrats, to some extent, Mariana, perhaps a large extent, still dealing with Obama hangover, a candidate who was unique in his ability to energize all the corners of the Democratic Party, and they've never found that formula since, many argued. Certainly 2016 did not. Are they still dealing with a bit of that in 2018, the Democrats?
I would say that what they're dealing with is trying to find a viable next candidate who can be the same as Obama or better than Obama, so 2.0, so to speak. And, what they're really having is this malaise because the only candidate they truly have left, short of Joe Biden, would be Bernie Sanders. And that's turning a lot of people off from the Democratic Party. They don't want a party where party leaders are pandering to socialism or even speaking of the S word. So we're seeing, this uptick in MPAs now. I
think as you look at Florida, MPAs, I've got the numbers in my head. I think MPA, no political affiliation in Florida, is 25–30%. Democrats enjoy a slight voter registration edge, about 4.7 million to 4.5. My numbers are maybe 100,000 off or so here. But nonetheless, it's interesting to that point as you look at the political calculus of where you go to find your votes now. And in Florida, forever a swing state. It's going to be interesting what the midterms tell us about that and what the primary tells us. What does August 28th tell us?
Well, what it tells us is, the Democrats going into August 28th in midterm elections have always had a problem getting the voters out. The most beatable Republican candidate for governor since Bob Martinez back in the early 90s was Rick Scott in 2010. Went up against Alex Sink, who had a statewide organization. She was a CFO, and Democrats didn't turn out, and she couldn't beat Rick Scott. So they have a real challenge going into beyond the primary, getting into the general election, trying to get their voters out. And the fact that their voter rolls shrank by 0.8% is not a good sign.
I see Mariana, who's so analytical, which I love, pouring over some of your thoughts there. Give us kind of your landscape thoughts here as we look to the 28th.
Well, the 28th is going to be decided by a small portion of voters in Florida that are registered either Republican or Democrat, and that's going to then take way to the general election of where the remainder of the electorate will have the opportunity to decide. But as Anthony points out astutely, we have to be concerned about the candidates who are on either end of the party spectrum to come to the center. So if we look at a Gwen Graham who has run a moderate campaign, there's a lot of opportunity for her to pull MPAs, moderate Republicans, and moderate Dems, whereas a candidate such as Ron DeSantis, should he take the nomination, he's going to have a very difficult time coming back to the center.
Perceived as hard right, and it's said so, and coming back, it's going to be a very interesting fall. State numbers show about 800,000 people have already cast ballots. That's a little less than 10%. We're about 9.3 million registered voters, but voting either absentee by mail through early voting. It changes the whole calculus for the candidates, too. What's your sense of it as you look at these numbers and how the candidates deal with this, too? Because it used to be kind of walk up to Election Day and hope you could build that last wave of enthusiasm. But right now, this election could be being decided by what we're seeing right here, depending on the surge in early voting and absentee. It's always intriguing to me. Antonia?
Yeah, and that's a big change in the way that we vote these days. And it means that from a candidate standpoint, look, even from the media, we got all our stories, advanced stories, in ahead of, much earlier than we had to, simply because we wanted to get these stories out to the voters before they make a decision. The candidates need to do the same thing.
I want to pick up on the thread you were talking about, Mariana, about the gubernatorial candidates. And we'll get the Senate race. We're not forgetting Rick Scott, Bill Nelson, but that'll be something we'll really be focusing on into the fall. And certainly the congressional races, we've done the debates here at WPTV. Those are going to be crucially important. You've got the Republicans, Dems, a very tightly contested congressional District 18 race. We're going to be looking at all of that coming weeks ahead of the actual election day. But the gubernatorial race for a moment. I'll have you look at the Republican side, you at the Democratic side before we go to break. Your take.
Well, in terms of the primary election, we know that, well, a lot of people have mailed in their ballots, they've done early voting, they're doing all of these steps to, vote for their candidate. The candidates, and when we look on the Republican side, in terms of layman's terms, let's say it's time for them to go for broke, right? It is better to lose on Election Day with $5 in the campaign account than to lose with $1 million in the bank.
Anyway, Putnam can make up the difference with the big Trump endorsement for DeSantis. Polls have showed him with a double-digit lead, almost all of it. Many prognosticators say born of Donald Trump's support. Your take.
Adam Putnam just needs to maintain the stance that he's Adam Putnam, that every Floridian knows and loves, and has elected him to statewide office again and again, and has showed that he's been here in Florida, where Ron DeSantis has been continually absent. Let's not forget, he'll be spending this coming week in Puerto Rico, stumping and out there doing things in Puerto Rico instead of being in the home state of Florida, showing Floridians that he's here to take action and do what's right by the state.
Democratic side of the ledger with so many candidates: Gwen Graham, Phil Levine, Gillum, Jeff Green, Chris King. Your take.
You'll find no direction in any of the polls. They've been all over the map. Every week a different poll comes out with somebody else in the lead or some other mix of candidates. So I think if you're the Democrats, it doesn't matter how many people have voted already. Don't leave anything on the table, because the fact of the matter is this could still be wide open. There's really no scientific poll that has identified somebody who's out in front, so far in front that the others can't catch up.
Thank you both, and we'll be back with more in just a moment.